Simone Ellis, a black woman in a tailored charcoal gray suit, entered courtroom 3B with quiet confidence. It wasn't arrogance, it was focus. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, the sound sharp and deliberate, signaling the beginning of something no one in that room would soon forget. She had come to represent Zion Brooks, a teenager who had been wrongfully accused of carjacking in a rough neighborhood. Zion's only crime had been his appearance, his skin color, and the assumption of guilt that came with both. He was just 18, with barely any criminal record, yet here he stood, facing charges that threatened to derail his life before it had really begun. Simone had spent years climbing the ranks of Howard Law School, always being told she was too bold or too loud by her professors, words that they never dared say to her male counterparts. She'd worked tirelessly, helping clients who could never afford the high fees of the big firms, using every tool in her arsenal to expose the ugly undercurrents of the system. But today was different. She was about to face a courtroom that was stacked against her. Simone stood tall before the judge, Judge Merrick, a man whose every wrinkle seemed to echo years of tired prejudices. Merrick was known for his stern demeanor, but even more so for his disdain for black lawyers. He had a reputation for silencing them before they could speak their truth. As soon as she began her opening statement, it was clear the battle was going to be uphill. "Your Honor, we are asking for a fair trial and an opportunity for my client to prove his innocence," Simone said, her voice calm but firm. She didn't raise it, didn't need to. Every word was a carefully calculated strike, each syllable loaded with purpose. But Merrick's response was swift and dismissive. He barely looked up from his papers when he responded, his voice laced with irritation. "Ms. Ellis, I don't need a lesson in fairness from you," he said, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Let's keep this professional, shall we?" Simone clenched her jaw but kept her composure. "With all due respect, Your Honor," she began again, "I'm asking for the prosecution to provide clear evidence, not just assumptions." She hadn't even finished speaking before Merrick slammed his gavel. "Overruled." Simone took a deep breath, the weight of the courtroom pressing in around her. She could feel the eyes of the prosecutor on her, the smug look of, "I know I'm going to win," etched across his face. But what they didn't realize was that Simone was used to fighting against stacked odds. She'd been doing it her entire life. And when Merrick ignored her objections for the third time in a row, she knew this case would be the one to make people listen. As the trial progressed, the air in the room grew thicker. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man named Bradley West, seemed to have one goal in mind: to make sure Zion was locked away. Every time Simone challenged his evidence, he'd laugh, shrug, and dismiss it. But it wasn't just the prosecutor. It was Judge Merrick who seemed determined to ensure Simone didn't have a voice. The final straw came when Simone made a simple request for a delay. She needed more time to review evidence that had been withheld. Merrick waved her off, ordering the case to proceed. "Are you seriously suggesting we delay justice for your client's convenience, Miss Ellis?" Merrick sneered, his eyes narrowing in disgust. Simone was furious, but she had learned the hard way that reacting in anger would only serve to play into their hands. So she held her silence, but it was a silence that made the air crackle with tension. As the trial continued, Simone felt the weight of systemic bias press down harder than ever before. Zion's future was slipping through her fingers, despite every effort she made to fight for him. She knew this wasn't just about one case. This was about all the black defendants who had been wronged in courtrooms like this. All the voices that had been stifled. Her voice was their voice now. When the trial ended, the jury deliberated for only 2 hours before returning with a guilty verdict. The injustice was palpable, suffocating. Zion's head hung low, his fate sealed by a system that had already written him off before he ever had a chance. But Simone wasn't finished, not by a long shot. That night, back in her apartment, Simone couldn't sleep. She scrolled through her phone, reading news articles about the case. Everyone was saying it was over, that justice had been served, despite the glaring flaws in the trial. She clicked on the image of Zion's face, a young man full of potential, now shackled by a conviction that wasn't his. And that's when it hit her. She wasn't going to let this stand. She filed an official complaint against the court, the prosecutor, and Judge Merrick. Misconduct, prejudice, denial of due process. She didn't just want to win this case. She wanted to expose the flaws in a system that had never been fair to people like Zion and to herself. Days later, Simone's appeal was granted. But it wasn't just any appeal. It was a motion for federal review, and within weeks it landed on the desk of the Supreme Court of the United States. The case was unprecedented. A black attorney challenging a corrupt court system, bringing the fight to the highest level in the land. But Simone didn't flinch. She had prepared for this her entire life. On the day the Supreme Court began hearing the case, Simone stood in front of 9 of the most powerful judges in the nation. Her voice carried the weight of the people who had been denied justice for far too long. When Justice Sotomayor spoke, she addressed Simone with the respect she deserved. "You've presented a case that will shape future decisions," Justice Sotomayor said, her voice reverberating through the chamber. Simone's heart raced, but she stood tall, her head high. "This is about fairness," she said, voice steady. "It's about making sure that no one is ever silenced again." Weeks later, the Supreme Court ruled in Simone's favor with a 7-2 decision. Zion's charges were dropped, and Judge Merrick was reprimanded. The case was a landmark in legal history, a symbol of what happens when the system gets exposed for its flaws. Simone became a national hero, invited to speak at bar associations, law schools, and civil rights rallies. But for her, the win wasn't about fame. It was about ensuring that no one ever faced the injustice that Zion did again. On the day of the ruling, as she stood outside the courthouse, Simone received a text from Zion. "Thank you, you saved my life." Simone didn't respond right away. She just stood there, feeling the weight of the moment. Because in the end, it wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving to everyone, including herself, that justice is always worth fighting for. Simone Ellis had been silenced in courtroom 3B, but now she had a voice that could not be ignored. She rewrote the rules, and she didn't need to apologize for it.